millions of dollars on the table. Legends built one bracelet at a time. Nerves of steel under the hot lights of Binion's Horseshoe and the Rio. And yet for some of poker's greatest players, none of it was enough to outrun the one opponent you can't bluff. Addiction. These are real stories. Real falls from grace. From the greatest natural talent the game has ever seen, found dead in a $54 a night motel room with $800 in his pocket, to a WSOP Main Event Champion who got sober from cocaine, Adderall, and synthetic heroin less than a year before winning the biggest title in poker, to a Hall of Famer whose toxicology report read like a coroner's worst nightmare: fentanyl, cocaine, and methamphetamine all at once. These are poker players who became addicts. Let's get into it. Stu Ungar. Stu Ungar won 3 World Series of Poker main event titles and is still considered by many, including Doyle Brunson, to be the greatest natural poker talent who ever sat at a table, despite standing only 5'5" and growing up on Manhattan's Lower East Side. 26 years old when he won his first main event in 1980, Ungar repeated as champion the following year, making him a back-to-back champion before he'd even turned 28. Then his mother died in 1979, and that's when cocaine entered the picture. "I did coke to keep up," he admitted years later. "You use it as an excuse to stay up and play poker, but then you take it home with you." What started as a way to stay sharp at the table turned into something he could never put down. By 1990, the addiction had taken over completely. On the 3rd day of that year's main event, sitting on a commanding chip lead, Ungar simply disappeared from the tournament floor, and he was found unconscious in his hotel room from a cocaine overdose. Somehow he still finished 9th. Years of snorting cocaine had collapsed his nose so badly that he wore blue-tinted sunglasses at the table just to hide it. Deep in debt and barely able to stake himself by 1997, Ungar was handed $10,000 by his friend Billy Baxter minutes before that year's main event began, making him the last player added to the field. He won anyway, capturing his 3rd main event title and earning the nickname the Comeback Kid from the Vegas press. None of that mattered because within months the money was gone again, spent on cocaine and sports betting just like before. On November 22, 1998, Stu Ungar turned up dead on the floor of a cheap motel room on the Las Vegas Strip, $54 a night, $800 still in his pocket, at only 45 years old. A month before he died, he told a magazine, "It's a sickness. I guarantee you it's taken 10, 15 years off my life." It took all of them, ending the career of the most talented player poker has ever produced before he reached 50. Mike Matusow. Mike Matusow, known across the poker world as The Mouth, built a resume of 4 World Series of Poker bracelets while quietly carrying undiagnosed bipolar disorder and ADHD that he spent years masking with methamphetamine and cocaine. Long before any of that, at 18, Matusow was already a gambling addict hooked on video poker, sitting through Gamblers Anonymous meetings before he ever turned pro at cards. Everything changed at the 2001 WSOP Main Event when he snorted meth for the first time, and by his own account, the drug transformed his game overnight. "I began playing at a level I'd never played at before," he said. "Every time someone showed a tell, I saw it." What felt like a superpower was really a countdown clock. Police arrested Matusow at his home at 9:30 in the morning on September 25, 2003, after he sold drugs to a supposed friend who turned out to be an undercover officer. Roughly 6 months in Clark County Detention Center followed, and he walked out just in time for the 2005 World Series of Poker. That release turned into a 9th place finish at the main event and a $1 million payday, proving the talent had never actually left. Getting properly diagnosed and medicated for his bipolar disorder and ADHD gave Matusow a new read on everything the drugs had been covering up. "I'm twice the player I was," he explained. "I'm more well-rounded and not as out of control and crazy. When I take my medication, I'm more subdued at the table. He laid out the entire story, the addiction, the arrest, the mental illness, in his 2009 autobiography, Check Raising the Devil. These days, Matusow stays clean, stays medicated, and hosts one of poker's most recognizable podcasts. And when fellow pro Layne Flack died in 2021, it was Matusow who put together the tribute. Arrest to Redemption is a rare arc on this list, and his is one of the few that actually gets there. Scotty Nguyen. Scotty Nguyen carries 5 World Series of Poker bracelets and more than $12.7 million in career earnings. But the moment most people remember is the drunken meltdown broadcast to the entire poker world in 2008. Nguyen arrived in America from Vietnam at 14, and within a few years of dealing cards at Harrah's in his early 20s, he'd grown hooked on the free drinks the casino handed out to dealers, a habit that never really left him. By his own account, he built a bankroll worth $1 million more than once, and lost it more than once too, to alcohol, cocaine, and marijuana. 1998 brought his first main event title, partly backed by Mike Matusow, yet that same summer he was drinking so heavily at a separate event that he had to publicly apologize afterward. The pattern repeated itself a decade later, only this time on national television. The 2008 $50,000 HORSE Championship carried the Chip Reese Trophy, named for the legend who had just passed away, and Nguyen showed up to the final table, visibly drunk, cursing at a 23-year-old opponent and berating cocktail waitresses in front of the cameras. He won anyway, taking home $2 million, while tournament directors declined to penalize his behavior at all. What followed was backlash from the entire poker community, and Nguyen eventually gave a full apology, saying there was no excuse for his behavior and that he no longer blamed other players for what happened. He promised never to drink on camera again, and he's mostly kept that word ever since. "That's poker, baby," the catchphrase that made him a fan favorite, still echoes across poker rooms today, even though the man behind it fought a far quieter battle most viewers never got to see. Layne Flack. Layne Flack, nicknamed Back-to-Back, won 6 World Series of Poker bracelets and a World Poker Tour title, and stood out as one of the most beloved and most self-destructive players of poker's boom era. Small card rooms in South Dakota and Montana gave him his start dealing cards long before he turned pro, and by the 2000s, he'd become a TV fixture who was rarely, if ever, sober while the cameras rolled. "Even if I'm one step away from simply passing out at the table," Flack once said, "I still monitor the game and control everything." Phil Hellmuth described him as someone who burned the candle hard on both sides, and Daniel Negreanu once paid roughly $60,000 just to get Flack into a rehab clinic. That bought him time, though not nearly enough. Flack was found dead at his Las Vegas home on July 19, 2021, at the age of 52, and it took nearly 3 months, the standard wait for toxicology results, before the Clark County coroner confirmed what had happened. Fentanyl, cocaine, and methamphetamine showed up in his system all at once, and the death was ruled accidental. Just 2 years before that, in a 2019 interview, Flack had said, "I know I'll be in the Hall of Fame," and in 2022, he was inducted posthumously into the Poker Hall of Fame. Huck Seed, hearing the news of his death, put it about as bluntly as anyone could. "He must have been murdered. There's no way an OD could kill that guy. It could, and in the end, it did." Gavin Smith. Gavin Smith, the Canadian pro who won WPT Player of the Year and a single WSOP bracelet, once calculated that he was putting away roughly 20 drinks a day, nearly every day, for years on end. He famously beat Phil Ivey heads up on Poker After Dark after downing a string of drinks on camera, and fans loved the spectacle, even as Smith privately knew better. "I think I have the illusion of being a very happy person," he admitted in 2010. "But on the inside, I've got my own personal struggles. Around 2009, he took a hard look at those numbers and quit alcohol outright for a stretch, later describing himself as a social drinker who never returned to the extreme drinking that had defined his earlier years. Smith died in his sleep at his home in Houston, Texas, on January 14, 2019, at the age of 50. This part matters most. It wasn't an overdose. The official cause was a heart attack, ruled natural causes, and his close friend and neighbor made a point of telling the public directly that it was not partying or due to drinking. Gavin Smith's story isn't really about how he died. It's about the years of heavy drinking he survived and was honest about, right up until his heart finally gave out. And it's why the very first event of the 2019 World Series of Poker was played in his name. David Chino Rheem. David Chino Rheem finished 7th at the 2008 WSOP Main Event for $1.77 million and picked up 3 World Poker Tour titles along the way. Yet he later admitted he was a stone drug addict during some of those very same headline runs. A 4-month jail sentence for marijuana possession and theft came early, well before any of the poker success, and set the tone for a career people would spend years trying to figure out. As his results grew, so did the rumors. Drug use whispered about behind his back, a mountain of unpaid debts to fellow pros, and backers who eventually stopped returning his calls altogether. This second addiction fills the void of the original addiction, Rheem said, looking back on how one habit simply replaced the other. For gambling, read drugs in Chino's case. Something shifted when he hit rock bottom. Then honestly, by God's hand, I stopped on my own, he explained. It was miraculous. I was fed up with chasing, being broke, and feeling miserable. That shift showed up in 2019 when Rheem won the PokerStars Caribbean Adventure Main Event for roughly $1.5 million and opened up publicly about being a stone drug addict during some of his most controversial years on tour. He's been direct about what he refuses to become. I don't want to be the modern-day Stu Ungar, Rheem has said. I want to be me. For a player who spent years dogged by every rumor poker had to offer, that's about as honest a line as anyone on this list has delivered. Greg Merson. Where Chino Rheem's story is still being written, Greg Merson's already has an ending, and it's the one story on this list where addiction didn't come out on top. Drugs took hold of Merson at 17, and by his freshman year of college, he was using cocaine so heavily that he lost nearly 30 pounds in 5 months. Rehab followed on August 8, 2007, and he managed 3.5 years of sobriety before relapsing into something worse than before. That was the first night I ended up doing Roxy's, he later admitted, referring to roxycodone, essentially synthetic heroin. It just was the best feeling of my entire life. You will always chase that feeling until the very end. Cocaine, Adderall, and synthetic heroin all had their grip on him at once, stacked on top of heavy drinking and marijuana, and at one point he played an entire WSOP series, convinced the pills were sharpening his thinking when they were doing the opposite. December 10, 2011 marks the day Greg Merson finally got sober for good, and less than a year later, he outlasted a field of 6,598 entries to become World Series of Poker Main Event Champion and Player of the Year in the same summer. He cried at the final table and placed the gold bracelet on his mother's wrist. Even now, the nightmares occasionally return. I suddenly woke up from the adrenaline rush, he said of one relapsed dream years later. It is one of the worst nightmares I can have. Merson quietly marked 10 years sober in December of 2021. I am more proud of my sobriety, he said, than any other achievement in my life. And coming from a champion who once won $8.5 million at poker's biggest stage, that statement carries real weight. Jimmy Cassella. To show exactly how far back this problem stretches, there's Jimmy Cassella, a name from long before Stu Ungar, long before the poker boom, long before ESPN ever pointed a camera at a card table. Casella became the first player in World Series of Poker history to win the first two events of a single series back in 1974. And combined with a third bracelet from 1971, he walked away from just 3 career cashes with $76,225, real money for Las Vegas in the 1970s. He never posted another major result after that summer. On August 10, 1976, just 2 years after his biggest triumph, Jimmy Cassella died of a drug overdose at 52 years old, and the full details of his addiction were never widely reported, a reflection of a different era that didn't yet talk openly about any of this. What's left behind is a name in the record books, a stack of old winnings, and a headline nobody wanted to write. Half a century later, versions of Jimmy Cassella's story are still being told. The cameras have just gotten better. 8 players, 8 different drugs, 8 different decades, and 8 very different rock bottoms. Some of them didn't make it out, and a couple of them, against every odd, actually did. Let us know in the comments which of these stories hit you the hardest. If you want more stories from poker's history, the wins, the collapses, and everything in between, like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.